Cool. So this is the EOF implementer call number 42. I'd like to welcome everyone here. So this call is occurring an hour earlier than typical. We decided to move back to daylight savings time instead of GMT. Looks like we lost some people, but we gained some people. It's just getting meeting times is hard across continents. So our typical agenda is we go through client updates, then we go through go through visit spec compiler updates, spec updates, then testing updates. So Charles is here. We'll get to him with compiler updates. As far as client updates, like I said, Besu has the spec implemented. I'm going through the reference tests as I find them and bring them in, making sure that we're up to date and agreement with some of those. When we get to testing, talk about some of the things that came in with execution spec tests. And yeah, so that's the status of Besu. I think I don't see Ref. I don't see another mind. Marius, do you want to speak for Geth? Any updates?
Sure. Yeah. So I kind of took over the implementation from Matt last week, and I think we had the first 4 opcodes implemented. So I implemented the 16 others this week, and I'm almost done. Like the implementation is kind of done, but it's probably horribly broken. So yeah, I'm still waiting to build up some courage to run the current tests against it to see what's broken. And yeah, I don't know. Like generally, in the specification wasn't super clear at some points, in my opinion. Like it was it was it was okay. It was understandable, but in some points I was like, okay, like yeah, the spec says something like we do it the same way that this other opcode does it, and then I just copy the code from the other opcode. But if that's really correct, or if there's like edge cases that aren't handled properly, I don't know. So yeah, I think if this were to move forward, I think that there needs to be some more work done on those specs, so to make sure that everyone can easily implement it. Yes. Otherwise, I'm kind of I yeah. From the spec wise, I should be done. The validation code isn't perfect yet. It's some old thing that I inherited that I need to spend some time cleaning up again. But otherwise, yeah, should be okay-ish.
Yeah, the stack validation, you'll definitely need to take another look at because there is a significant change there at the request of the compilers to go from for stack height, it's a range of heights or an explicit height, and there are some rules about forward references and detecting dead code. The tests in the EOF section of the reference tests, they do have a lot of tests that generally speaking hit almost all of the corner cases. And when they don't hit the corner cases, we need to identify them and write new tests. So it covers a lot of it. It'll tell you if you're ballpark or how far you're off. And my experience is one fix will knock down 100 tests at once because they're testing the same thing 100 different ways. So that's kind of been my experience updating it from Shanghai. So we don't have anyone from Aragon here. I think that's all the clients. No Ethereum JS people. Okay. So next on the agenda is compilers. I think I see Charles. Do you have anything to add?
No updates from the implementation side.
Okay. Is there anything you need from the EIPs or the specs to improve your implementation of Viper?
That's a good question. I think we should move forward on the init code validation, to be honest, although it's not a huge deal. I think it makes the runtime spec a little simpler. And yeah, I
And
mean,
those were the rules about only one return data or create cop code referencing a subcontainer.
yeah, EOF contract, EOF create versus return contract.
Okay.
So one question I had was for the compiler teams was right now we have 3 opcodes that kind of do the same thing in my opinion. The swap n, exchange, and cube n. Wouldn't it be possible to get rid of cube n and swap n and just have exchange? And you can do the same thing with just exchange and one of the dupe opcodes.
So I think Solidity really wanted swap n, and I proposed exchange, and then there's like different variations that basically give you code size trade-offs. Depending on how many, like you can expand the range of immediates for exchange, but then you get a lot of code size regressions or non-optimal code size. I think the best thing, honestly, would be to have variable length immediates, and then you could just have swap n or exchange. You could just have exchange actually, and then which immediates, which stack items it swaps is like kind of unbounded. But we didn't have time to get variable length immediates into the spec.
Okay. And Andre in chat said that is confirming Daniel's request for swap n dupe n. And
there were variants with like there's a lot of variants of swaps, which basically can improve code size for compilers. Like a specialized swap 2n opcode might be like, could help save some bytes or something. And there was a variant with like exchange 1 and exchange 2, which like took different numbers or different size immediates. But eventually we shaped it down to just swap n and exchange.
So usually we do just a round, like a stand-up of what took place, and then we do discussions. I would suggest that maybe this particular question we could move to the discussions, because yeah, we have been debating this EIP for quite some time.
Yeah, so that would be in the spec updates. We already have 2 others listed in spec updates. Trying to remove the regular state change option for create that doesn't involve that. Init container size definition and testing updates. Are there any other points of discussion we should add to the agenda? I guess we're setting this because we've done the stand-up for the teams and the compilers. Maybe test should get a stand-up, but that's a deep discussion that's gonna possibly go long. I want to make sure there's enough time for everyone to get their issues in. So are there any other general to set the agenda requests for subjects?
In terms of the spec updates, I think we can mention that the EOF EAPs are now aligned with the mega spec, so up to date.
Okay.
There's some minor clarifications to the 7620, which is the creation EAP. But there are mostly wording changes in the pipeline right now, and all the others are aligned with the mega spec. And we almost have the meta EIP, Tim. It's now there's a PR to add it, and I don't know what's the fate of it.
I've been having problems with getting new stuff added as well, new EIPs. I had that address-based extension. It sat for 2 weeks. I asked for feedback, and then they asked for a dramatic change, and it's frustrating that it takes a long time to get a new EIP in. So hopefully we just need to ping them again. Because one thing that was on my tier list was the address-based expansion, which involved the change to the balance opcode and to the call series opcodes to in the spec if the high 12 bytes of any data in it to do a revert for now rather than trimming it. That may or may not get in, but it's not even an EIP yet because the editors haven't approved it. Okay. So any other spec updates for the roundtable? Any other state? Huh?
Sorry, not for me.
Okay. Let's do a quick roundtable on testing. How's the testing work going? What do we need from testing? What does testing need from us?
Hey everyone, it's Dan from the
Hello?
testing team. Oh, hi Dimitri, do you want to take it?
Hey, Dimitri,
Go for it.
also here from the testing team, but might be a little noisy here. Currently, up until now, the testing was done in the test repo using retested and special tooling provided by the clients. So just simple tools that receives EOF bytecode and returns if it's okay or not, accepted or not. But the main problem is that such tests contributed in the test repo, they're just bytecodes. And that EOF bytecode is generated somewhere else by testing tools developed by client developers in their own repositories, and then they provide the test. So the whole idea is not working here because the source is somewhere else. And we want the source to be in the test. And now we migrating all the tests from the test repo into the PySpecs using the Python scripting, which significantly allows us, it increases our capabilities, allows us to add scripting to the sources. And the idea we have in mind is to just make also such thing for EOF, so that the code that currently used to generate all the EOF bytes would be in a Python script. And then by running this Python script from PySpec repository, you can generate all these test vectors in JSON format. You can execute it. You can even generate a blockchain test format and execute it on Hive, or you can use different client tools to verify how different clients passing this test, and so on and so on. So currently, what we are working now is this Python implementation that will be used to generate the test and migrating all that we have currently from test repo into Python.
Okay. So what are the asks for the EOF implementers for the tests? You start using execution test specs for our target?
Yeah, we're very close. It's still in beta and it's not merged. It's nothing too complicated. We already in touch with Pavel from EVM1 team. He offered to migrate their tooling from C++ into PyScripts, and by using that, I hope soon we're gonna see first Python test developed for EOF. And once that is done, we create examples and would ask other teams who develop testing for EOF to also use Python format. So that from you, it will be required to just set up the PySpec framework and see how it works and just generate the test using PyScript.
Okay. Because I see the PRs out there. Yeah, I guess that was my next question for contributing to it. Are those frameworks suitable to start contributing tests?
because
At
we've
this
done
moment,
so.
it's still developed.
Sorry, please go ahead.
Go ahead, Dimitri.
At this moment, we are still in development, but should be ready very soon. Just yeah, we need to set up the workflow and make a documentation and examples of how you can just write a EOF test in Python.
I guess one question I have is because we've used the Python spec tests for like the past fork, is the blocker because we don't have like the basic EOF testing infrastructure in the Python test, and you know if we're gonna test like the more recent EOF EIPs, we need to have imported the tests for like the previous ones because they're kind of dependent on it. Or is there a way that like we can test the latest EOF EIPs which don't have Ethereum/tests test suites for them directly, because we can just go ahead and write them in the Python's test suite, just like we added, you know, any random opcode in the past fork.
Here it depends on EOF, like a level of complexity that this EIP introduced, because we plan to develop some structures in Python that you can use to describe EOF code, so that the test will look more descriptive, not just the bytecode. It will be readable structures like a normal source code, and by executing the structures, it will produce the bytecode, which you can then execute on your custom EOF verification tool. Like this is an idea, for example, for now, that using PySpecs plus EOF tool, you can generate and verify your tests. So if you introduce some minor change, like if you just want to test bytecode inside container, that shall work, no problem. But if it's something severe which affects the structure of EOF code itself, then you might need support from Python to change those structures, I think.
Okay. One question I have is code validation testing. We had at Shanghai, there was a fuzzing interface written that all it did was validate whether the code was valid or not. It didn't do any execution. Is there any support like that in the current test specs, or does that need to be added?
You mean just for EOF?
Right.
Currently, all the EOF tests, they're verified by EOF tool. So it's just valid or not. There is no deployment test for now in the test repo.
Okay, what is EOF tool? Can you elaborate on that?
EOF tool is something similar to transition tool, but it's very simple. It just verifies EOF bytecode provided to it. So it takes one argument, which is a bytecode, EOF container, and it's making an analysis of this code and just return, is it valid or not? And if it's not, then what went wrong? What is the exception? Maybe it was
Where is this
wrong magic.
specified? Is it implemented anywhere, or is it just a spec?
Implemented by EVM 1. And yeah, I don't know actually how many clients implemented it,
I
but
think you
EVM
guys
1
mean,
is the main one.
I think you guys mean exactly the same thing. That's the validation tool that we specified or before, and it's also implemented by Geth, so we have it as well.
Okay.
In the future, we plan also to verify it by trying to deploy transaction, trying to deploy container, making a blockchain test, and executing it using existing test infrastructure.
Okay. Andre?
Yeah, so to clarify for the testing team, maybe. So what we've been doing so far, we made two kinds of tests. One are these that you mentioned, we call them validation tests, and they contain just the bytecode and return whether it is valid or not. But then another part, big part, was regular state tests in Ethereum tests repo, and this is also important, and this tests basically the execution of EOF. So basically, like having some EOF contract in pre-state, so like already deployed, and then running a transaction on it. This is also important and something that we should have somehow also in the execution spec tests, I guess, if we are migrating there.
Yeah, once it's in Python format, it will be just one type of a Python script that will be able to generate both validation test and deployment test and blockchain test. We can do it from this one Python script.
Okay, can this still take raw bytecode because part of the tests are to test blatantly invalid scripts?
Yeah, that's always possible, but it's not good. Not good when the test is just a bytecode without like if something changed in the code structure, we cannot change the bytecode really easy.
Well, but the point is to bring in a series of bytes that are always invalid, and we're testing to make sure validation works by doing things like messing up the version or using wrong section numbers or truncating fields.
That's what I talk about, that we want to introduce this in a Python script so that you can just describe what exactly you're trying to break in a EOF structure by defining, like, there is a container class, there is a section class, and then you can overwrite individual bytes even. Yet, of course, you can make some vectors, fuzz generated vectors, for example, and provide it as a JSON and just use it in a script as well. It's no problem.
Right. The fuzzing is really what I'm focusing on. We have some the Python's great for positive tests, but we're also going to need negative tests in validation where things are just ever so slightly off.
Yeah, it's always possible. It's not a problem.
Okay. So it sounds like we're waiting for this EOF framework to land, and then we can start contributing tests for all of the new post Shanghai features and port over some of the Shanghai features, or are those going to come straight from the EVM1 code?
EVM1 will be used to verify, like I'm talking about this EOF validation tool that just takes a bytecode to verify it. But
Right.
to write it, we plan to use the Python script. And yeah, if the VIP changes so quick, we would need to be updating all the structures and definition of codes. For now, we just want to release that bare minimum of what already exists to support it in Python. That's my idea. Like right now, there isn't so much to show, but just a little more, a few days, and there's going to be a working example and demonstration so that you get an idea how it will look like. And if you all want to see how it potentially might look like, check out the existing .py tests, such as state test or blockchain test, and it will be very similar to that. Yeah, I can share also one link, is what we have at this moment.
Okay, so the bug 500, it's listing all the stuff that's pre-existing. That's good. So let's say I wanted to help move things quicker and contribute stuff to EOF to the PySpecs. Is there a list of where the best things to start working on are?
So I think if I just follow up quickly for Dimitri while he's looking for the link, like I discussed with Mario and Dimitri before, and I think basically if you can just hold off for like a couple of days,
cool.
Then essentially right now we've got like the EOF code generator in this branch that Dimitri's just posted, I think. And then we'll basically put an example for everyone together. And then based on that example, EOF implementers can also start adding test cases. And that's kind of the piece of the puzzle that we don't have, that we'd like to then like add parameterizers to like a base sort of test in order to generate different test cases. And I think that, like we'll be ready for people to contribute to that quite quickly, like within a few days, basically.
Okay, so hold off till Monday. Cool. Any other testing updates that you want to share, or should we move on to the spec discussions and other discussions?
think
There's a
that's
request
on
for
our side.
bytecodes that pass verification. They're in reference tests / EOF tests. There's also some PRs. I guess that's another thing. I mean, because we're mostly deprecating retest test and moving to execution spec tests, I can point to the PRs that I've been testing against. Yeah, I'll dig that up after this meeting and send it to you. Write that down. All right. So if there's nothing left from testing, let's go back to spec updates. There's two big issues. Well, there's actually only one big issue, one clarification. One is to define init container size for 7620. Does that looks like the smaller issue? Does that look like something that's easily addressed?
I think it was addressed already.
Okay. So the big issue there on spec updates is a question about how we do code initialization, whether we go with one of the published plans, which is to use a standard contract that is brought in via a regular state change, whether we use the new transaction type for TX create, whether we use init code plus appending call data. I think those are the three big options there. I guess that would be pull 78 would be the spec issue there. Before we move on to this, any other items we want to add to the agenda to discuss for spec or other issues?
Yes,
Cool.
I would like to discuss whether we really need the bytecode obfuscation thingy. The
Bytecode
opaque
obfus-
bytecode. Sorry. Can you
Bytecode
still hear me?
obfuscation thingy?
That code is kind of not visible to the EVM anymore.
Okay. The introspection, banning code introspection.
Yes.
So this was probably the biggest change between the Shanghai version and what's being planned for the Prague version. This was a very specific request given in the Alps at the Alpine thing. And basically what it boils down to is we want to have a structure for EOF where the code is not accessible from other EOF code. So it would involve banning things like code copy. And we need to have new ways to create the code. One of the upsides is that you cannot dynamically create code within code. You also don't have to expose the code to it. So if you were to do a transformation to the code, you could still run it in other systems and have it work just fine without having to bring a legacy copy of the code. I think this is modernizing the EVM is one take I take on it. Because you got to go through contortions on like an Apple M1 chip to be able to have your code create code and then run it within the same process. That's something that Java and .NET have to deal with, the just-in-time compilation, and it takes some very specific permissions. JavaScript just-in-time compilation is another example of that. It takes in iPhones, and it's the whole issue with, I think it's called the NX bit, the no execute bit. A lot of processors have implemented. This brings strong code and data separation. Code is outside the system. Is it really needed? The question is, it's going to be needed at some point. And when do we introduce it is my take on it. If we don't implement it in EOF now, then we're going to need to do another breaking change in the future to introduce this. Go ahead. I heard someone come off mute. Maybe I didn't. So I guess the question for Marius is, can we get rid of the code introspection, banning code introspection? Is that necessary? Any other opinions?
So from back in the day from interop, I kind of remembered that the reasoning was that we might want to change the code of existing contracts by I don't know if we introduce a new opcode or if we introduce a new precompile and get rid of an opcode or something, that we can basically hotfix or patch the existing opcode, the existing bytecode.
That is one of the advantages we can do, yes.
Yes. I think that's totally unrealistic and it will never happen, and we shouldn't plan for it. I didn't 100% get your explanation about the Java stuff. I will have to think a bit about it more. But if it's only about changing or modifying code of existing contracts, I think it's not a good change, or it's not a warranted change. If there's more, and I kind of get this, that it's kind of cleaner, the separation of code and data at this point. But yeah, I need to think about it more. But so my position was that if this is like the only argument is that we might be able to consolidate opcodes in the future, then I don't think we should do it.
No, it wasn't rewriting. That was just a convenient thing to come from it. This is more focused on like ZK proving and other systems to make it significantly easier for them to prove. Self-modifying code is highly problematic for such systems. Powell?
Can you hear me actually?
Can you turn your volume up?
Wait. Is this better now?
Yes.
Yeah, I think actually the Velcro tree transition is the point that this actually might be handy. And I mean, this is nothing that it's figured out yet, but even for legacy codes, we are thinking about doing some modification to the code somehow to make it easy to execute in the Velcro trees. So it's a bit fuzzy, but I think this is one of the examples when this actually we're going to kind of transform code from one format to the other.
And those would just be packaging changes, not actually changing the flow of the code.
Well, for legacy, this is hard, but for EOF, if there's something that would be like very beneficial for Velcro tree execution, I'm just guessing here, like giving an example. Yeah, then during the Velcro tree transition, this modification can be applied.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the same that I've heard from Guillaume, that if in EOF they don't need to have code size or code copy, this is somehow simplifies Oracle support of EOF.
Because you don't have to take the entire bytecode necessarily and have risk of that showing up at any time. You could run off in theory, you could run off a cache or a partial cache. Were there any other reasons for code introspection that I missed for banning it?
I just wanted to kind of point out that the reason we kind of currently do the reason we kind of need to return code dynamically right now, one big reason is to have data and immutables. And you don't actually need the data section for that. And I posted this in the chat, but like basically like in zk-sync, they have like a separate section, which I guess is kind of analogous to data, but it's like immutable load and immutable store, and it just can't be touched after init code. And that way you can do away with touching the container at all. It's just kind of like a separate store. It's like analogous to sload and store, and it's just a separate region. So that's like another way of designing it, I guess.
But would we need to
just,
push? Would we need to push that into the Ethereum memory model?
Yeah, it's like you make the code simpler and add another memory region, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I get what they're doing. My concern is it's still work that'll have to be done, and we're just moving around to a different part of the spec. So that approach wouldn't remove any of the problems. It just changed where we would address it. It might make it simpler in some cases. It's like changing the point of origin on a math problem. It might make it fundamentally simpler. But the work doesn't go away because we still have to change the point of origin.
Yeah, I don't think it removes the problem. It's just a different way of architecting it.
Yeah. So kind of a tangent on the removing code introspection. There's two other, in addition to banning opcodes, which I guess is a fourth item. There's two other big important breaks that are coming in with this. One is banning gas introspection, and the one I want to add, which is to add preparation for address space expansion. And part of the philosophy for that is these are breaking changes that break the previous behavior of the legacy VM. And if we do it, every time we break it, we would need to have a new incompatible version. So another request made in Austria was if we're going to break things, we should break as much things at once as possible so we don't ever have to do this breaking change again. So that's part of the philosophy between removing the gas opcodes and replacing the 3 call instructions with call instructions that don't accept gas, is that we can do gas introspection. And that also would be the philosophy behind updating the balance and call operations to, for now, require the top 12 bytes be 0 or exceptionally halt. So that gives us the space that when we do, if we do, create utility for the upper bits of the address, that we could use them. Whereas right now, by EVM spec, only the lower 20 bits are kept. The top 12 bytes are shaved away. The lower 20 bytes are kept. The top 12 bytes are shaved away. And we have commentary from some smart contract users that they depend on this behavior. So we can't just change it retroactively. Self-destruct is banned, recreates one of the processes. It has some speed up gas golfing with taking stuff out of ABIs, I think is the big deal. If you don't have to mask off the top 12 bytes and you can rely on the opcode doing it, you can gas golf away some values. Metamorphic contracts are gone because we got rid of self-destruct. Yeah, I saw that in the chat. That we're also getting rid of self-destruct in general in legacy. So yeah, I guess what's different about EOF is we're just getting rid of self-destruct entirely and just not dealing with it. Any other comments about getting rid of code introspection and getting rid of gas introspection? How do people feel about it? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
From the compiler perspective, it means you can't write a JIT compiler inside of the EVM. But
Right.
otherwise, we have no need for code introspection.
And I also think that's the point, is to make sure you can't write a JIT compiler inside the EVM.
Yeah, I'm rather okay with this. Like understanding the main concern is the complexity of the change, right? There's nothing really there's like other issues, except like this touches a lot of places.
Yeah, it does. It even touches legacy going into EOF code. We needed to put some.
That's stuff I understand. I mean, I could see like how kind of like this towards feature is kind of spreading all over the places. But are there any other concerns related to this?
So I'm not hearing any. People are probably going to think about this and come up with yeah, they're going to talk about, gather their thoughts about it and get a more cohesive expression probably in our next week's meeting, which is fine. I just want to make sure that we have out on the table all the concerns, so everyone is on the same stage, to be able to understand what's going on. With the remaining time, I think we should move into the issue with getting rid of the regular state change. This is something I'm advocating for. Basically, we would allow the big change. Right now is spec in the mega spec. The only way to bring an EOF contract into the system is to use a special contract that would need to be introduced somehow, either as a precompile or as an irregular state change. Kind of like the same way the beacon chain root was brought in. My concern there is that the ergonomics with the tooling is going to be kind of difficult, and it would be better if we were to use, and we'd also need to introduce potentially a new transaction type for TX create. But my big ask is that for types 0, 1, and 2 transactions, that we allow EOF contracts to be in the input data, but they won't be in the in the payload of the transaction. But they won't show up in the input data of the init code call if it's detected to be an EOF container. But all data trailing it would be in the input data. So it would act much like you did an EOF create with the container and all trailing data coming out there. So that's my request there. Any opinions on this? I know we've spoken about it in the past. How do people feel about it? What do they know about it? Is silence consent? Should we just adopt it? Not a popular thing, but
Yeah, we discussed it as well, and I think generally I'm in favor of. I would prefer to modify the transaction structure to get the same effect, but I believe this is kind of more complicated and requires much more testing outside of EVM. So yeah, I think I'm okay with the like hacky transaction. Like the interpretation of this whatever core data for the create transaction, right? This is the main thing. Yeah, I did check some stats about how often create transactions are actually used, and this is like one 1 in the 1000. So it's not a lot of traffic with this, I think.
Okay. Because I think one of the reasons we talked about getting rid of it was concern about the code introspection, and changing the create flow wasn't on the table at the time.
I think it was like
Um,
back and forth. I think we kind of in the beginning accepted that the one of the exceptions to this were when the code actually is kind of somehow visible is this create transaction, and you need to kind of push the EOF container somehow to the system.
Okay.
Like I'm not a client maintainer, so it doesn't matter all that much to me. But like from the compiler perspective, the EOF plus call data, the container plus call data is like it works really similarly to how we would do right now. Like right now, we hard code the size of the runtime code. Right, you have like this init code, right? And then you hard code the end of it at compile time, and then you kind of treat everything after that as like faux call data. So that would be like the most similar to what we currently do.
Okay. So Marius, you don't get the concerns with the init creation, or what's the concerns?
No, I get the concerns with the like. I don't really see why we need the new transaction type.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
except for if we want to support these. Yeah, I don't know, contracts that can deploy other contracts.
right, and I think that's why it came up. Like the situation, like take example of a smart contract bundle contract. So you have three different user operations. One of them wants to deploy a transaction. How do you get that data on chain if you can't put it in call data? So that's what led us to creating another transaction where you attach the init code to it. So you can have that bundled. You can have the transaction reordered. The init code doesn't have to land in a specific init code slot within the transaction when we reference it by hash. If multiple user operations reference the same contract, they could deploy the same init code by including it in the transaction once. So those were some of the design decisions we got there, and the issue there is 4337 type support. But that was also designed before we moved on getting rid of gas introspection. And right now you can't write a smart contract. You can't write a 4337 invoker securely because you can't limit the gas sent to another call. So we would have to rely on legacy. So it's not a complete design there yet either. It is Rube Goldbergy. So I guess one of the questions is this something we should move out of the initial implementation, the TX create and the init transaction, and just keep EOF create with there with the containers and factories? What are people's opinions on that?
That would have been my initial idea when I saw this.
To move TX create, move out TX to remove TX create operation and the init code transaction and the ISC precompile and move it to another fork?
Yes.
Okay, how do people feel about that? Would this be Osaka or Amsterdam or an undetermined fork?
I don't know, like it feels like EOF is pretty big, and if we can shave off some of the stuff, then maybe we can get it included. And yeah, I don't know. I think I'm torn, as everyone here, between the like getting as much breaking stuff into as possible and trying to ship it. And I don't know, the whole transaction type, like other than the transaction type, most of the changes are very localized, and the transaction types and the init codes they touch another layer for me, right? It's the outer message layer, I would say. Like it's not the EVM itself, and so just testing it is way more awkward than testing the other EVM changes, in my opinion. But
Okay.
I don't know. Like this felt to me like the feature that I could live without the most.
Okay. So we're running late into the meeting. Don't think we can get a final decision on that, but let's think about this for the next week. To change the scope of EOF right now, pull out of the current implementation TX create and the init code transaction and the precompile contract, and add in its place the contract creation concatenation solution. Think about it for a week, and we'll move to finalize it next week if people are okay with it. So people have time to think about it, figure out if it's going to work for them. So let's move on that in the meantime. So finalize that next week, or not finalize it next week if people have concerns with it. But let's put that on the table for a decision for next week. Okay. Any other things people want to think about for the next week for finalization next week?
The init code validation, PR.
Init code validation. Okay, let's put that in there as well. The requirement that, yeah, I think it's spec'd out in one of the PRs. I'll put that in the follow-up notes. Can you sling it to me on Discord so I make sure I get the right ones?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So for next week's meetings, we'll consider those two final changes. If you have concerns about them, read them over, share them on the channel, and we'll discuss them and finalize them next week if there's no objection. I'd like to thank everyone for calling in. It's great to get participating again. I guess we need to do some more communications to make sure that Nethermind and Solidity and Reth are able to attend, as well as Aragon. I would like to thank everyone for their time and work on this. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.